Michael Carter sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The dashboard clock glowed 10:42 p.m., and the parking lot outside Jennifer's office building was nearly deserted. He had been sitting there for over an hour, the remnants of his daughter's bedtime story replaying in his mind. He hated lying to Lily, pretending that Jennifer had been caught up with an important meeting and would kiss her goodnight later. But before we dive into the story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future tales. Michael glanced at the flickering fluorescent lights of the office building. He wanted to believe Jennifer's explanation about her late nights, tight project deadlines, and mentoring a new team, but the weight in his chest told a different story. As a 36-year-old lead programmer for a rising tech company, Michael wasn't a stranger to late hours. He had pulled his share of all-nighters over the years, but something about Jennifer's recent behavior didn't add up. The once open and affectionate woman he had married was now distant, her laughter muted, her touch hesitant. He had chalked it up to stress at first, but the little things piled up. Her late-night texts, the phone calls she took in the other room, the way she avoided his eyes when he asked about her day. Michael was a man who thrived on logic and problem-solving. His profession required a meticulous mind, the ability to spot anomalies in a sea of data. Yet, in his personal life, he had always trusted Jennifer implicitly. For 10 years, they had built what he thought was a strong marriage. They had weathered financial struggles, career changes, and the chaos of raising a child together. But now, sitting in that darkened parking lot, he felt like a stranger in his own life. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, startling him. It was a text from Jennifer? "Don't wait up, the meeting is running late. Love you." Michael stared at the message, the bitterness in his chest growing sharper. Love you. The words felt hollow, like an afterthought. He placed his phone back down and leaned his head against the seat, trying to decide if he was overreacting or if his instincts were right. The moment of doubt passed as quickly as it came. Michael straightened, his jaw tightening. He didn't want to believe Jennifer was lying, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion any longer. He wasn't there to accuse her. He was there to find the truth. A sleek black car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Michael's breath caught as he recognized Jennifer stepping out of the passenger side. She wasn't alone. Alan Drake, her boss, exited the driver's side, his hand casually resting on Jennifer's lower back as they walked toward the building's side entrance. The way they leaned into each other, their laughter muted but intimate, was enough to send a cold rush through Michael's veins. Michael clenched the steering wheel, fighting the impulse to storm out and confront them. His logical mind kicked in, urging patience. He watched as they disappeared through the door, the weight of betrayal settling over him like a suffocating fog. At this point, his mind reeled back to the past, the moments that had led him to this parking lot. Michael Carter wasn't just a devoted husband and father. He was a man who had always believed in hard work and loyalty. Growing up in a modest household in Ohio, he had learned the value of perseverance from his father, a factory worker who never missed a day of work. Michael had carried those lessons into his career, rising steadily in the competitive world of programming. His team often called him the code whisperer for his uncanny ability to fix seemingly unsolvable problems. But tonight, no algorithm or debugging tool could fix what he had just witnessed. Jennifer had been his college sweetheart, the lighthearted artist to his serious programmer. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel at ease. Her creativity had translated into a successful career in marketing, eventually landing her a high-profile role at Alan Drake's firm. Michael had always admired her ambition, but now he wondered if he had been blind to the warning signs. He replayed the changes in her behavior over the past year. There were the canceled date nights, always justified by work emergencies, the weekend trips that she claimed were team-building retreats. Even her relationship with Lily seemed strained. Jennifer used to be the kind of mother who never missed a school play or bedtime story, but lately she was always too tired or distracted. Michael had tried to convince himself it was temporary. After all, marriages went through rough patches, but seeing Jennifer with Alan had shattered any illusions he had left. He couldn't bring himself to go home. Not yet. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the city streets, the neon signs and headlights blurring together. His mind raced with questions. Was this the first time? Or had he been a fool for years, oblivious to what was happening right under his nose? Michael pulled over near a park, stepping out into the crisp night air. He sat on a bench, staring at the playground where he had taken Lily just days ago. His phone buzzed again, another text from Jennifer. "Meeting's over. Heading home now. See you soon." Michael laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar in the quiet night. Heading home, as if she hadn't just been with another man. In that moment, Michael made a decision. He wasn't going to confront her, not yet. He needed to be sure. If there was one thing he had learned from his years as a programmer, it was the importance of gathering evidence before presenting a case. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity. He was fighting for Lily, for their future, for the truth. Michael returned to his car, a steely determination replacing the initial shock. He would uncover the truth, no matter how painful. And when the time came, Jennifer and Alan would have to face the consequences of their choices. Michael Carter couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest since the night he'd seen Jennifer with Alan in the parking lot. Days had passed, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment. The laughter they shared, the way Alan's hand lingered on Jennifer's back. He needed answers, but he wasn't ready for a confrontation. Instead, he decided on a simpler approach, surprising Jennifer at work. The idea seemed innocent enough. He would bring her coffee, a small gesture to show he cared. If nothing else, it would give him a reason to see her in her work environment, to observe her behavior without warning. With this plan in mind, Michael left his office early, stopping at Jennifer's favorite cafe to grab her usual order, a caramel latte with an extra shot of espresso. He even picked up a croissant, remembering how she used to love them during their college years. As Michael approached the sleek glass doors of Jennifer's office building, he felt a flicker of doubt. Was he overstepping? Overreacting? He tried to push the thoughts aside, reminding himself that he was just being a thoughtful husband. Still, his pulse quickened as he stepped into the brightly lit lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with a cheerful smile, greeted him warmly. "Hi, I'm here to see Jennifer Carter," Michael said, balancing the coffee and croissant in one hand while adjusting his tie with the other. He wanted to appear calm and collected, even if his insides churned with unease. The receptionist hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Oh, Jennifer? Let me check." She picked up the phone and dialed an extension, her cheerful demeanor faltering slightly as she whispered into the receiver. Michael caught snippets of the conversation, words like unexpected visitor and not at her desk. After a moment, the receptionist hung up and offered him a tight smile. "I'm sorry, but Jennifer isn't here right now. She left for a meeting with Mr. Drake a little while ago." Michael felt a pang of disappointment, quickly followed by suspicion. "Do you know when she'll be back? I brought her coffee," he said, holding up the cup with a forced smile. The receptionist fidgeted, her eyes darting toward a group of Jennifer's co-workers clustered near the elevator. They were whispering amongst themselves, throwing Michael quick glances before looking away. The awkwardness in the air was palpable. "I'm not sure," the receptionist replied carefully. "It might be a while. Their meeting is off-site." Michael nodded, his smile tight. "Thanks for letting me know." He turned to leave, but the weight of their stares followed him out the door. Something was definitely off, and he wasn't imagining it. Back in his car, Michael sat in the driver's seat, staring at the coffee cup in his hand. The warmth of the drink contrasted sharply with the cold knot forming in his stomach. He debated driving home, but an instinct he couldn't ignore kept him rooted in place. He decided to wait. The minutes dragged on, each one amplifying his growing unease. Michael's mind raced with possibilities, but he forced himself to remain rational. He wasn't here to jump to conclusions. He was here to observe. Finally, just after 7 p.m., the glass doors opened and Jennifer stepped out. Michael's breath caught as he watched her exit the building, her figure illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. She looked stunning, her hair perfectly styled, her tailored blazer accentuating her figure. But it wasn't her appearance that held his attention. It was the man walking beside her, Alan Drake. Michael felt his heart sink as he observed them. Alan was laughing at something Jennifer had said, his hand brushing her arm casually. Jennifer tilted her head, her own laughter ringing out. It wasn't just their conversation that unsettled Michael. It was their body language, the way they leaned into each other. The way Jennifer's face lit up in Alan's presence felt too intimate, too personal. Michael clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening against the steering wheel. He wanted to storm out of the car, to demand answers. But something stopped him. Instead, he stayed put, his eyes fixed on them as they walked toward the parking lot. Jennifer and Alan stopped by a sleek black car. Alan opened the passenger door for her, his hand resting lightly on her back as she slid inside. Michael's stomach churned. He watched as Alan rounded the car, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car pulled out of the lot, leaving Michael sitting there in stunned silence. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Was this just a professional relationship? A close friendship? Or was it something more? The way they interacted gnawed at him, making it harder to convince himself that he was overreacting. Michael's internal monologue was a battle between denial and cold logic. They looked too comfortable together, too familiar. But maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe it's nothing. As the black car disappeared into the night, Michael felt an overwhelming urge to follow them. But he stayed rooted in his seat, his thoughts spiraling. The coffee cup sat untouched in the cup holder, the croissant forgotten on the dashboard. He felt like a fool, sitting there with gifts for a wife who might not deserve them. Michael exhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm inside him. He couldn't confront Jennifer, not yet. He needed more than just suspicions. He needed proof. If there was one thing he had learned from years of debugging code, it was that assumptions without evidence led to mistakes. With a heavy heart, Michael started his car and drove away, his mind already formulating a plan. He would find the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And when he did, he would be ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Michael's visit to Jennifer's office were marked by a growing sense of unease. Though he tried to push the memory of her leaving with Alan to the back of his mind, the cracks in their marriage became impossible to ignore. Jennifer's late nights grew even more frequent. Her excuses rehearsed but vague. She often claimed that last-minute deadlines or urgent client meetings were keeping her at work. But Michael noticed a shift in her demeanor, a lack of warmth, and the absence of the easy laughter they once shared. Transitioning from casual concern to quiet suspicion, Michael began paying closer attention. He observed how Jennifer would quickly silence her phone whenever it buzzed, a faint smile flickering across her lips as she typed rapid replies. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now seemed to be glued to her hand. One evening, Michael tried to bridge the growing distance. As Jennifer sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, he leaned in with a gentle smile. "Hey, what's got you so distracted?" he asked, feigning lightheartedness. Jennifer barely looked up. "Just emails," she murmured, her tone clipped. Michael's chest tightened as he watched her. Every laugh she didn't share, every moment she brushed aside, it was like the Jennifer I knew was slipping away, he thought bitterly, retreating to the kitchen. Each passing day, the doubt grew stronger, the foundation of their relationship beginning to crumble under the weight of unanswered questions. Michael knew he couldn't ignore it much longer. It was a quiet Thursday night, the kind of evening that should have been peaceful. Jennifer had gone to bed early, citing exhaustion from yet another intense day at work. Michael lingered in the kitchen, staring at her phone, left charging on the counter. The device seemed to taunt him, its screen dark but heavy with unspoken truths. His heart raced as conflicting emotions battled within him. He had never crossed this line before, never felt the need to. But tonight, the weight of suspicion was unbearable. Jennifer's distant behavior, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, it all led to this moment. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. It felt wrong, he admitted to himself. But I had to know the truth. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the phone and swiped to unlock it. To his surprise, her passcode hadn't changed. As the home screen lit up, Michael's fingers trembled. He navigated to her messages, his mind screaming at him to stop, to turn away. But then, he saw it, a string of conversations with Alan. The texts were casual at first, but as he scrolled further, his breath caught in his throat. The messages were undeniably incriminating. Private jokes, intimate confessions, and plans for their next meeting. One message stood out, sending a cold shiver down his spine. I wish we could just be together without hiding. Michael's hands gripped the phone tighter as he continued reading. It wasn't just flirty texts, he thought, his stomach churning. It was their entire secret life. 3 years of lies unraveled in minutes. He put the phone down, his body numb. The evidence was undeniable, but the betrayal cut deeper than he had expected. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage was gone. As Michael stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen, he realized his life had been forever changed. The kitchen felt colder in the days following Michael's discovery. Each time he glanced at Jennifer's phone or heard her laugh, the betrayal replayed in his mind. But instead of confronting her immediately, Michael made a calculated decision. He needed proof, not just for himself, but for the battles that he knew lay ahead. Quietly, methodically, he began to gather evidence. He started with her phone. Late at night, while Jennifer slept soundly, Michael would unlock it and take screenshots of the incriminating messages. He stored them in a secure folder on his computer, labeling each file with dates and times. From there, he moved to Jennifer's social media accounts, scrolling through her posts and tagged photos. Subtle comments from Alan, seemingly harmless to an outsider, now carried an entirely different weight. Next, Michael turned to financial records. He pored over their bank statements, looking for unexplained charges, extravagant dinners, hotel bookings, and gifts he couldn't recall her mentioning. Each discovery was another stab to his already wounded heart. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered. Messages on her phone revealed not just her affair with Alan, but hints at other indiscretions during business trips. Michael's stomach churned as he pieced it all together. She wasn't just cheating with Alan, he realized, his jaw tightening. My wife had turned into someone I didn't recognize. By the end of his investigation, Michael had compiled a damning collection of evidence. It was painful, but he knew it was necessary. When the time came to confront Jennifer, he wouldn't just rely on accusations. He would have the truth in hand. Once Michael had gathered enough evidence, he shifted his focus from discovery to action. Confrontation could wait. First, he needed to secure his future. The realization that his marriage had been built on lies filled him with cold determination. If Jennifer thought she could blindside him, Michael would prove her wrong. His first step was financial protection. Late at night, after Jennifer had gone to bed, Michael logged into their shared accounts. He quietly began transferring funds into private accounts, careful not to trigger any alerts. He closed unused credit cards and removed his name from shared liabilities. To avoid arousing suspicion, he left enough money in the joint account for regular expenses, keeping up the appearance of normalcy. Next, Michael contacted an attorney specializing in divorce cases. During their first consultation, he laid out the evidence he had collected, his voice steady but resolute. The lawyer commended his foresight, assuring him that his documentation would put him in a strong position when the time came. Finally, Michael began to make subtle changes to his routine. He moved personal items of value into a storage unit, ensuring they wouldn't be caught up in the inevitable chaos. At work, he informed his manager of potential personal challenges ahead, setting the groundwork for stability in his career. If she thought I'd be blindsided, Michael thought as he secured the last of his preparations, she was in for a rude awakening. With everything in place, he braced himself for the moment when his careful planning would pay off. The opportunity to confirm his suspicions came sooner than Michael anticipated. Jennifer had casually mentioned yet another business trip with Alan, this time to a conference in a neighboring city. While her words were smooth and practiced, Michael saw through the veneer. This was no professional engagement. It was an escape for them, free from prying eyes. Michael decided it was time to act. The day of the trip, he told Jennifer he had a full day of meetings and wouldn't be reachable. Instead, he took the day off and followed her car at a safe distance as she left the house. His heart pounded with every turn, the tension building as he trailed her for miles. Eventually, Jennifer's car merged onto the highway, and Michael's suspicion deepened. Hours later, she arrived at a luxurious hotel on the city's outskirts. Michael parked discreetly across the street, his view partially obscured by trees but clear enough to see Jennifer step out of the car. Alan exited shortly after, grabbing her bag as they walked side by side to the hotel entrance. The casual intimacy of their interaction, the shared laughter, the subtle glances, confirmed everything. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, snapping photos of them entering the lobby. The weight of the moment bore down on him. "I took photos, my hands shaking with anger," he later recalled, the betrayal cutting deeper than he thought possible. The drive home was excruciating. The images of Jennifer and Alan replayed in his mind, each one more painful than the last. By the time Michael pulled into his driveway, his resolve had solidified. There was no turning back now. Jennifer would face the consequences of her choices, and Michael would be ready. It was an ordinary morning, or at least it seemed to be. Sunlight filtered through the blinds as Michael poured himself a cup of coffee, the aroma filling the quiet kitchen. He had been up for hours, his thoughts racing as they often did these days. Across the house, the faint hum of Jennifer's shower signaled the beginning of her day. Michael could hear the water shut off, followed by the familiar sound of her steps descending the staircase. This time, however, they carried a weight that felt different. Jennifer entered the kitchen, her expression calm but unusually serious. Dressed impeccably as always, she ran a hand through her damp hair and took a deep breath. Michael looked up from his coffee, pretending not to notice her hesitation. "Michael," she began, her voice measured but soft, "I think we both know things haven't been right for a while." Michael said nothing, taking another sip of his coffee and meeting her gaze. Her words hung in the air like an unresolved chord. When he didn't interrupt, she pressed on. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, her fingers lightly gripping the back of a chair. "And I think it's time we end this. I think it's time for a divorce." For a moment, the room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Michael let her words settle, carefully schooling his expression. Inside, his mind was racing, but outwardly, he remained calm. Calmer than Jennifer had likely expected. "You're right, Jennifer," he said, his voice steady and without a trace of anger. "It's time we go our separate ways." Jennifer blinked, momentarily caught off guard by his lack of resistance. Relief flickered across her face, as if she had braced herself for an argument that never came. Her shoulders relaxed, and she gave him a small, almost grateful smile. "I'm glad you understand," she said, her tone lighter now. "I think this will be best for both of us." Michael returned her smile with a polite nod, his eyes betraying none of the storm brewing inside. She thought she'd walk away unscathed, he thought, his grip tightening slightly around his coffee mug. She had no idea what was coming. Jennifer's apparent relief was almost insulting. She truly believed this was the end of their story, that she could walk away on her terms without facing the consequences of her actions. Michael had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meticulously laying the groundwork to ensure he wouldn't be left blindsided. Now he watched as she moved through the kitchen with an air of casual finality, opening the fridge as though discussing what to have for dinner, instead of the dissolution of their marriage. "I think we can handle this amicably," Jennifer added, her back to him as she rummaged through the shelves. "There's no need to make things complicated." Michael almost laughed at the irony of her words. Complicated? She had made things complicated the moment she chose to betray him, the moment she decided that lies and secrecy would replace the trust they had built over a decade. But he bit back the comment, knowing that silence would serve him better now. Instead, he finished his coffee and placed the cup gently in the sink. "Of course," he replied, his tone neutral. "Let's keep things simple." Jennifer turned to him, her smile now brighter. "I appreciate that," she said, as though they had just agreed on splitting household chores. She was already walking away from the conversation, heading upstairs to prepare for her day, confident that she had handled things with grace. Michael stood in the kitchen for a long moment after she left, his eyes fixed on the space she had occupied. Grace, he thought bitterly. She thinks this is grace. Inwardly, Michael knew the battle was just beginning. Jennifer might believe she was in control, but she hadn't anticipated the depth of his preparation. He had every message, every transaction, every piece of evidence needed to dismantle the carefully crafted narrative she would undoubtedly present. If she thought she would walk away with her reputation intact, or without facing the consequences of her choices, she was sorely mistaken. As the sound of Jennifer's footsteps faded upstairs, Michael allowed himself a small, private smile. The game had shifted, and he was no longer the naive, trusting husband she had taken for granted. Jennifer had fired the first shot, but Michael was ready with an arsenal of his own. The morning sunlight seemed brighter now, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold determination building inside him. Michael rinsed his hands under the tap, wiped them dry, and headed to his office. He had work to do. The weeks following Jennifer's divorce announcement were a flurry of quiet but calculated action on Michael's part. While Jennifer seemed content to move forward under the assumption that this would be an amicable split, Michael was hard at work building his case. Every piece of evidence he had painstakingly collected, texts, photos, financial records, was now in the hands of his attorney. Together, they crafted a detailed counterpetition that not only outlined Jennifer's infidelity, but also implicated Alan in an alienation of affection lawsuit. Michael's goal wasn't just to protect himself, it was to ensure that neither Jennifer nor Alan walked away unscathed. She wasn't just walking away with a piece of my life, Michael told himself as he signed the final documents. She was walking away from the destruction she caused, and I wouldn't let that happen. Days later, Jennifer's carefree attitude came to an abrupt halt. She walked through the front door of their house with a stack of papers clutched in her hands, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor echoed through the house as she stormed into the living room where Michael sat, calmly reading. "What the hell is this, Michael?" she demanded, her voice sharp and trembling with anger. She held up the papers as though they were incriminating evidence of his betrayal rather than hers. "You're out of your mind!" Michael looked up from his book, his expression impassive. "It's the truth, Jennifer," he said evenly. "Something you've been avoiding for a long time." Jennifer's face reddened, her grip tightening on the papers. "An alienation of affection lawsuit? Really? Against Alan? You've gone too far. This is insane." Michael stood, his towering presence making Jennifer step back instinctively. He didn't raise his voice, but spoke with a quiet intensity that carried more weight than any outburst could. "No, Jennifer," he said. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided to lie, to cheat, to throw away our family for someone like Alan. I'm not insane, I'm just making sure you don't get away with it." The room fell silent for a moment. Jennifer caught off guard by his calm yet resolute tone. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she shook her head, frustration and disbelief etched into her features. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Michael raised an eyebrow, unshaken by her threat. "Regret?" he echoed. "The only regret I have is trusting you as long as I did." Jennifer's eyes glistened with tears, though whether they were born of anger or guilt, Michael couldn't tell. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving the papers scattered on the coffee table. The sound of her car starting in the driveway followed moments later, leaving Michael alone in the quiet house. He exhaled deeply, the weight of the confrontation lingering in the air. Despite the tumultuous emotions swirling inside him, he felt a sense of clarity and control he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time, he wasn't the passive victim in this unraveling marriage. He was the one taking charge. Michael returned to his seat, picking up his book as though nothing had happened. He knew this was only the beginning of the battle, but he was ready for whatever came next. Jennifer had underestimated him, and Alan had made the mistake of thinking there would be no consequences. They were both about to learn just how wrong they were. The fallout from Michael's counter-petition began to unravel Jennifer's carefully constructed life like a thread pulled from a fraying sweater. What she had once believed to be a private affair, shielded by secrecy and clever lies, quickly became a public disaster. The first blow came from her workplace. Alan's inclusion in the lawsuit triggered an internal investigation at their company, and rumors of their affair spread like wildfire. For a firm that prided itself on a pristine reputation, the news of a senior executive's illicit relationship with the subordinate was nothing short of catastrophic. Human resources launched inquiries, and Jennifer was called into meetings that felt more like interrogations. As the days passed, the whispers in the office became impossible to ignore. Jennifer avoided eye contact with colleagues who once greeted her warmly, their smiles now replaced with judgmental glances. The final meeting came swiftly and without ceremony. HR informed her that her actions had violated company policies and her employment was terminated, effective immediately. Her severance package was rescinded due to gross misconduct. Jennifer left the office for the last time, her box of personal belongings clutched tightly to her chest. The walk to her car was a gauntlet of shame, her colleagues' stares drilling into her back. Once inside the car, she sat in stunned silence, staring at the steering wheel as the weight of her decisions finally began to sink in. Meanwhile, Alan's life was crumbling just as quickly. The alienation of affection lawsuit forced his personal life into the spotlight. His wife, furious and humiliated, filed for divorce, citing adultery and emotional cruelty. The divorce proceedings became a media circus, and Alan's once stellar career unraveled under the scrutiny. Shareholders demanded his resignation, and within weeks, he stepped down from his executive role in disgrace. His name became synonymous with scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the city. Jennifer, now unemployed and ostracized, found herself increasingly isolated. Her once close-knit circle of friends began to pull away, unwilling to associate with the scandal surrounding her. Calls and messages that once filled her phone dwindled to nothing. Even her family, ashamed of the headlines, offered little more than half-hearted platitudes. One evening, sitting alone in the darkened living room of her apartment, Jennifer picked up her phone and called the one friend she thought might still listen. The call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she tried another number. This time, it connected. "Hello?" came a hesitant voice on the other end. "It's me," Jennifer said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to do anymore. Everyone's abandoned me. I've lost everything." The person on the other end sighed. "Jennifer, I'm sorry, but you brought this on yourself. I can't be a part of this anymore." The line went dead, leaving Jennifer staring at the blank screen in disbelief. The silence was deafening, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her choices. The world she had built on lies and deception had collapsed, and she was left standing in the ruins, utterly alone. In the months that followed the upheaval of his marriage, Michael found himself in an unfamiliar yet oddly liberating position. The storm of betrayal and legal battles had passed, leaving behind a quiet clarity. With Jennifer's departure and the divorce proceedings nearing their conclusion, Michael turned his attention to what mattered most: his daughter, Lily, and the life they would build together. Adjusting to life as a single parent was not without its challenges, but Michael approached it with the same meticulous dedication he brought to everything else. He rearranged his work schedule to ensure he was there for Lily's school drop-offs, soccer games, and bedtime stories. The extra effort paid off. Lily's laughter returned, her smile brighter and more frequent than it had been in months. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lily curled up beside him with a book in her lap. Michael glanced down at her, marveling at her resilience despite the changes in their lives. He knew the questions would come eventually, and when they did, he wanted to be prepared. "Dad?" Lily's voice was soft, her head resting against his shoulder. "Why doesn't Mom come around much anymore?" Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, determined to give her the honesty she deserved without burdening her with the weight of adult problems. "Lily," he began, his voice gentle but firm, Sometimes grown-ups don't stay together. It's not because of anything you did, and it's not because we don't love you. Mom and I just weren't meant to stay together. But you and I. Lily seemed to consider his words, then nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly, her small hand slipping into his. As long as we're a team. Michael smiled, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and sorrow. Always, sweetheart. As days turned into weeks, Michael found a new rhythm for their lives. He poured himself into his work, earning a promotion that allowed him to provide a comfortable, stable home for Lily. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, movie nights, and ice cream runs, simple moments that brought them both joy. Though the scars of his marriage lingered, Michael refused to let them define him. Instead, he saw the experience as a turning point, a chance to rebuild his life with purpose and clarity. He took solace in the small victories, a successful project at work, Lily's excited chatter about her school friends, and the quiet evenings where they sat together, content in each other's company. One night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with a sleepy smile. "You're the best, Dad," she mumbled, before drifting off. Michael stood by her bedside for a moment, the words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever came next, with his daughter by his side. Years had passed and life had moved on for Michael. Lily was now a confident teenager, excelling in school and thriving under Michael's unwavering support. His career continued to flourish, and he had built a life of stability and peace, a far cry from the turmoil of his marriage's end. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michael received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was one he hadn't heard in years, yet it was unmistakable. "Jennifer." "Michael?" she said, her tone hesitant and weak. "I need to see you, please." Her request surprised him, but curiosity and a lingering sense of closure prompted him to agree. They met at a small park not far from their old neighborhood, a place once filled with memories of happier times. When Jennifer arrived, Michael was taken aback by her appearance. She looked frail, her once vibrant presence diminished by time and illness. She sat beside him on the weathered bench, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "Michael," she began, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. I destroyed our family, and I've regretted it every day since. What I did, it was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back." Michael listened silently, his expression calm but unreadable. When she finished, he took a deep breath and turned to face her. "I've moved on, Jennifer," he said, his tone steady but firm. "I've forgiven you, not for your sake but for mine. I couldn't carry the weight of that anger anymore." Tears filled Jennifer's eyes, and she nodded. Though his words weren't absolution, they were enough. As she stood to leave, Michael felt a sense of finality. The chapter that had once defined so much of his pain was now, at last, fully closed. Not long after their meeting, Michael received the news he had been expecting, but that still left him quiet and contemplative. Jennifer had passed away. Her illness had progressed quickly, leaving little time for further reconciliation or goodbyes. Michael felt a pang of sadness, not the sharp pain of loss, but a quiet acknowledgement of what had once been. The funeral was a modest affair, attended by a handful of family members and friends who had remained in Jennifer's life. Michael stood at the back, watching as people shared memories of her. They spoke of her creativity, her vibrant personality, and the warmth she brought to those around her. It was a version of Jennifer that Michael remembered fondly, one untouched by the pain of betrayal. Later that evening, Michael sat by the lake, where they had spent many evenings together during their early years. The water was still, reflecting the fading light of the sunset. He thought about the woman Jennifer had been, the love they had shared, the life they had built, and the mistakes that had ultimately broken them apart. Jennifer was a chapter in my life, Michael reflected, his gaze fixed on the horizon. One that shaped me but no longer defined me. As the sun dipped below the water's edge, Michael felt a quiet sense of peace. The grief and anger he had once carried were gone, replaced by acceptance. He had made his peace with the past and was ready to embrace the future fully. Years turned into decades, and Michael found himself thriving in ways he had never imagined during the darkest moments of his past. His focus on Lily had paid off. She grew into a compassionate, driven young woman who carried the strength and resilience Michael had worked so hard to foster. Watching her graduate college was one of the proudest moments of his life, but nothing compared to seeing her prepare for her wedding day. The ceremony was held on a warm spring afternoon, surrounded by friends and family. As Michael walked Lily down the aisle, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey they had shared, the struggles they'd faced together, and the unbreakable bond they had built. His heart swelled with pride as she exchanged vows, stepping confidently into her own future. During the reception, amidst the laughter and music, Michael felt a presence beside him. He turned to see Jennifer. She looked older, her face marked by time and reflection, but her expression was soft and genuine. "You did a great job raising her," Jennifer said, her voice carrying a note of admiration. "She's amazing." Michael smiled, his gaze following Lily as she danced with her new husband. "She deserves the world," he replied simply. Jennifer nodded, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. In her eyes, Michael saw an understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the finality that had long been settled between them. She stepped away, blending into the crowd, and Michael let her go without a second thought. As the evening wound down, Michael sat alone for a moment, watching the glow of lanterns reflect off the lake nearby. He thought about the life he had built, the lessons he had learned, and the peace he had found. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had chosen to move forward, and in doing so, he had discovered the fullness of life. The quiet joy of the night lingered in the air, leaving a soft yet powerful reminder. Even in the face of betrayal and pain, there is always a path to healing, to growth, and to a brighter future. For Michael, that path had led him here, to a moment of profound love, fulfillment, and peace. After Jennifer's passing, Michael found himself drawn to the place that had once been their sanctuary, a quiet lake surrounded by towering pines, where they had spent countless evenings in the early days of their marriage. Now, standing on its tranquil shore, the reflections of rippling water shimmered like fragments of memories, both bitter and sweet. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Michael sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the water, a place they had once called their spot. He let the silence settle around him, his thoughts flowing as steadily as the gentle waves. Here he could remember without bitterness, reflect without pain. He closed his eyes, the weight of years lifting as a profound sense of calm filled him. "The storm has passed," he thought, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm free, and I've built a life worth living." He thought of Lily, her laughter and kindness. He thought of the grandchildren who now filled his home with joy. Life had given him trials, but it had also given him resilience. His story, he realized, wasn't about loss. It was about renewal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in hues of gold and crimson, Michael stood and turned away. He left the past where it belonged, walking forward into the promise of another new day.